All right, welcome back to ABA exam review. Today we're continuing our RBT practice exam series. We're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for our proven study materials, please check out btexamreview.com. We offer 3 practice exams, a task list study guide, and of course our famous combo pack. When you pass your exam, make sure you let us know so we can include you in our Sunday shout out. Other than that, let's work hard, study hard, get to our questions. Question 1. A client's parents don't want to use physical prompting, but a most to least prompting strategy is in place. The client can imitate. What type of prompt would be best to use? There are a couple key things in this question that we need to consider. First, what is the question asking? Well, it's asking about what type of prompt we're planning on using. And we're going to determine that with the given information in the question. So first, we know they don't want to use physical prompting. So we have to just get rid of physical prompting, right? In this case, our information says they don't want to use it. We're not going to use it. But we are using a most to least strategy, meaning we can't use physical prompting, but we still need to use a prompt that is pretty intrusive. So if we can't use physical prompting, what is the next in our hierarchy prompt that is intrusive compared to physical prompting? Well, next up is going to be modeling. And if we're going to use a modeling prompt, we need to make sure that the client can imitate. Well, in the question, it tells us the client can imitate. So based on this information, we can assume what? We can assume we're going to use a modeling prompt. Again, we're using a most to least, meaning we're going down the hierarchy from most intrusive prompt to least. Physical prompting is the most intrusive. We can't use physical, so we need to go down a step to modeling. And to use modeling, we need to make sure the client can imitate, which they can. So what type of prompt will be best to use? A, modeling. Yes, it's what we just predicted. B, positional. A positional prompt is very unintrusive. It simply moves around your stimuli. A verbal prompt is arguably the least intrusive prompt. And a gestural is just a step above a verbal prompt. So other than modeling, the other 3 are very, very unintrusive, and they would not be considered first after physical prompting and a most to least strategy. If you are craving chocolate chip cookies and you reach into the cookie jar and find a cookie to eat, the cookie jar functions as a what? So we just put out our reinforcement video. Make sure you go check that out. We are talking about here the chocolate chip cookies in relation to the cookie jar. You are craving the chocolate chip cookies, so you're looking to find cookies, right? The motivation for chocolate chip cookies is high. But until you find chocolate chip cookies or something that tells you chocolate chip cookies are available, we haven't found an SD yet. When you see the cookie jar and you reach inside, you find a cookie to eat. So now, when you see the cookie jar, what is that cookie jar signaling to you? A, it's an SD for positive reinforcement. Is the cookie jar now signaling positive reinforcement is available? Well, absolutely. You had motivation. The value of the cookies were high. You saw the cookie jar. You reached into the cookie jar and you found what? Cookies. You found your positive reinforcement. So now when you see the cookie jar, it is signaling to you that positive reinforcement in the form of these cookies is available. SD for negative reinforcement. Well, negative reinforcement wasn't delivered, right? You gained the cookie from the response of reaching into the cookie jar. And it wasn't a punishment procedure because in the future, we can assume that if you're looking for cookies, you're going to go back to the cookie jar. And why? Because it is now an SD for positive reinforcement. And every time you see that cookie jar, it's signaling to you, hey, there are cookies in here. Positive reinforcement is available once you reach inside and grab a cookie. And you have to remember that, right? The motivations can be high, the MOs can be high, but until we get a stimulus that signals to us reinforcement is available, there is no SD. In the case of the cookie jar, once we get positive reinforcement from reaching inside the cookie jar now becomes an SD for positive reinforcement. Simply put, though, in a much more simpler way, the cookie jar is simply signaling to you that reinforcement is available in the form of these cookies. What is an appropriate way to describe a primary reinforcer? Now remember, we have two main types of reinforcers, right? We have conditioned and we have unconditioned. Our unconditioned reinforcers are also known as primary reinforcers. Our conditioned reinforcers are known as secondary reinforcers. So in this case, we want to describe a primary reinforcer, also known as an unconditioned reinforcer. And what do we mean by unconditioned? Well, we mean that the reinforcer has no learning history, right? It's not paired with anything. We didn't have to create it. It is just innately a reinforcer. Most commonly, we think about food, water, things like warmth. Given a long enough time, they'd be reinforcing for anybody. Okay. We don't have to pair food and water and breathing, right? And oxygen with anything for them to serve as reinforcement. Okay. They're primary unconditioned reinforcement. So if we're going to describe our primary unconditioned reinforcers, how are we going to go about doing that? A, it is a stimulus that the learner wants the most. Well, not necessarily. Just because it's unconditioned, just because it's primary, doesn't mean that the learner wants it the most. All right. A lot of people don't necessarily enjoy drinking water, right? They need it. It is a primary reinforcer. If they go long enough without it, they're going to want it, but it's not necessarily what they want the most all the time. B, it is a stimulus that is reinforcing without any learning history. Good. And that is really what it comes down to. Primary reinforcers do not require any learning history. They don't require any pairing to function as reinforcement. Read all of your answer choices. That's our golden rule. C, it is a stimulus that is reinforcing through pairing. This one is for secondary and conditioned reinforcement. When we pair neutral stimuli with primary or unconditioned stimuli, we get secondary and conditioned stimuli. That's a little higher level, but pairing is what creates new conditioned reinforcement. Primary reinforcers are not conditioned. And then D, it is a stimulus that functions like money. Money is not primary. Money is secondary. Money is conditioned. Until money is paired with something valuable, money has no value, right? That's why little kids don't understand the value of money. It hasn't been conditioned yet. If we're talking primary, we're talking unconditioned, and we're talking stimulus that is reinforcing without any learning history. No pairing required. After several months of teaching a client to use their microwave in his apartment, what will be next if checking for maintenance was the goal? Now be careful here. This one is a little bit tricky. What is our goal here? Our goal is checking for maintenance. Start there. This is why we are very careful. We systematically read the question and understand the question before going into the answer choices. We're not in a rush. Our goal is checking for maintenance. So what is maintenance? Maintenance is one of our vocabulary words, so let's define it. Maintenance is simply saying the learner can still do the skill after learning stops, after teaching stops. Meaning you teach a skill, teaching stops, the learner can still do the skill. So if we want to check for maintenance, how are we going to go about doing that if our skill is using the microwave? A, continue teaching the microwave skill, but fade some of the reinforcement. With true maintenance, are we still teaching that skill? We are not. The only way to verify that a skill is actually maintaining is to remove all teaching. That's what maintenance is. You're no longer being taught it, but you still can do it. B, start teaching the microwave skill in a different setting. If we start teaching in a different setting, what are we starting to program for? We're really starting to program for generalization, right? Because we taught it in the apartment. So we want to look for maintenance in the apartment. Maintenance can only occur if we already know they can do the skill in the environment. If we're teaching in a different setting, then we're just programming for generalization. C, stop teaching the skill and ask the client to use a microwave a week later. Good. This is about as close as we'll get, right? We're no longer teaching the skill, but we're still going to check to see, can they still break down or can they still use their microwave? C is close to maintenance as we might get. D, ask the client to use the microwave in a new setting. Again, this is similar to B. This is just generalization. We're not worried about the new settings right now. We want to know maintenance. If we stop teaching them the skill, will they still be able to use their microwave? That's what we're looking for. And in order to check for that, we need to stop teaching the skill and then ask the client to use the microwave a week later. C is our answer. A home for juvenile delinquents is convinced that withholding television is a good punishment for using bad language. How would we know this intervention functioned as punishment? When we are describing something as a punisher or when we're describing something as punishment, what are we really saying? We're really saying that it's a consequence that is decreasing behavior. Okay. We're not defining it by the topography. We're not defining it by traditional terminology or traditional thinking. All we're concerned with is it decreasing the behavior? Same thing with reinforcement. The only way something is reinforcing or considered reinforcement is if it increases behavior. Something is only punishing if it decreases behavior. Full stop. So if we have this home for delinquents who is withholding television and they're saying it's a good punishment for using bad language, how are we going to know for sure that it functioned as a punishment? Well, we need to see how is it changing behavior. A, we can be sure it is punishing because something preferred is being withheld. Absolutely not. This should never be your thinking with either reinforcement or punishment. We're not defining it by how it looks. It needs to be defined by how it affects future behavior. B, we would want to look at how the usage of bad language changed in the future. Perfect. They say it's punishment. We say, okay, has the bad language decreased? If it has, then we can say, all right, well, it is functioning as punishment. If bad language has not changed, it is not functioning at all as punishment. So we have to look at the future behavior of bad language. C, we would want to look at how the current usage of bad language changed. We're not concerned with current usage. You can't change a behavior that already occurred. We're changing future behavior with consequences. And then D, we would want to figure out if the television was reinforcing. That has nothing to do with it being a punisher. Okay. We're worried about how is this withholding television going to change bad language in the future? If it's not changing anything, it's not punishing. If it's decreasing it, it is punishing. So, how would we know this intervention functioned as punishment? Well, we would want to look at how the usage of bad language changed in the future. A behavior assessment indicates that the target behavior is using a spoon incorrectly and the replacement behavior is using the spoon the right way. If you were told to use differential reinforcement, what behavior would you put on extinction? Think about this question. It isn't tricky, but the wording is different than typical DR questions. So we're talking about differential reinforcement and extinction. Okay, and extinction is part of differential reinforcement. So what is extinction? Extinction, we're withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior in order to decrease that behavior. Okay, so if we're using differential reinforcement, what are we doing? Well, we're putting on extinction the behavior we want to decrease or stop, and we're increasing other behaviors, right? We're reinforcing other behaviors. So we're looking for the behavior we're putting on extinction. And the behavior assessment indicates the target behavior is using a spoon incorrectly, and the replacement behavior is using the spoon the right way. So what makes this a little tricky is we don't ever use the word decrease, right? But you have to kind of use your context clues and figure out, well, if our target behavior is using the spoon incorrectly, and we have a replacement behavior, then we're going to want to reduce what behavior? Well, of course, the target, because we're replacing the target behavior with the other behavior, which is using the spoon the right way. So what behavior are you going to put on extinction? A, using the spoon incorrectly. Right. We want to reduce using the spoon incorrectly. So we're going to withhold reinforcement from using the spoon incorrectly. And we're going to reinforce what? Well, of course, using the spoon the right way. C, using a fork. Using a fork is not part of the plan, okay? So we're not really sure what we're doing with the fork, all right? All we know is our target behavior is using the spoon incorrectly. Nothing is being said about the fork. So don't just start assuming and adding information that really isn't there. And then D, cannot be determined. Well, of course it can be determined, okay? We're going to use extinction on our target behavior because we're teaching the replacement behavior of using the spoon the right way. So what behavior are we going to put on extinction? A, using the spoon incorrectly. Team USA was eliminated from the World Cup after a 3-1 loss. Team USA scored around at the 76th minute, but the Netherlands scored at the 81st minute. 5 minutes would likely represent what measurement in the scenario as it relates to scoring? All right, let's think about this one. Okay. Team USA was eliminated from the World Cup after a 3-1 loss. Not really what we're worried about, right? What are we worried about here? We're worried about scoring. Okay. So Team USA scored around the 76th minute. The Netherlands scored at the 81st minute. 5 minutes is going to represent what as it relates to scoring. So, how does 5 minutes relate to these two goals? Well, we know what? We know 5-minute passes in between scoring. So, if we're looking at the time in between two responses, what do we call that? A, frequency. We're not counting anything. It's not a how many or not a count. B, duration. Now, be very careful here. Duration is what? Duration is the length of time of one behavior. Are we measuring the length of time for a behavior? We're not. We're measuring the time in between the behaviors. So just picture this right here, the time in between the 76th and the 81st minute. That's what we're measuring here. Are we measuring latency? Are we measuring the time from an SD to a goal? Again, we're not. We're measuring the time in between goal scoring, in between responses. So the time in between responses is what? What's enter response time? Got to be very careful when dealing with timing questions. Duration, latency, IRT all deal with time, but in different ways. Duration looks at the total length of a response. Latency is the SD to the response. Inter-response time is time in between two responses. Here we have a score at 76 and a score at 81. Our time in between is our inter-response time. A task analysis should be concerned with which of the following items when creating the behavior chain. All right, kind of a fluency question on behavior chains and task analysis. What is a task analysis? Task analysis is breaking down a complex skill into steps to create a behavior chain. A behavior chain is what we teach. It's the steps we teach to teach a larger behavior, right? Pretty simple. Task analysis comes first, break down the behavior, create the behavior chain. Easy enough. Now, the question is asking about when using a task analysis, what should we be concerned with? What should we be concerned with when creating a behavior chain? Should we be concerned with A, the length of the behavior chain? Well, sure. We don't want it too short where there's not enough steps, but we don't want it 50 steps, right? We don't want it extremely long. So we need to determine what is the proper length of that chain. B, the difficulty of the behavior chain. Well, absolutely. Too easy, and we might not actually teach the skill. Too hard, and we'll never teach the skill. Length and difficulty really do matter. C, the skill level of the learner engaging with the behavior chain. That is absolutely a priority, right? We need to personalize these things, and the skill level is going to directly impact the length and the difficulty. If we have a learner with a really high skill level, then our length and difficulty are going to be drastically different than a learner with no skill, right? So we have to be concerned with all of these things when making the behavior chain, because how we create the behavior chain is going to really impact our success when teaching the chain. So, what of the following items should we be concerned with? Well, the length, difficulty, and skill level. So, really, D, all the above. Fantastic. Thank you for watching. Make sure you check out btexamreview.com for all of our practice exams, study guides, and combo packs. Like, subscribe. Check us out every Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Of course, Mondays. As always, work hard, study hard. See you soon.